and liquid oxygen, which we will also refer to as LOX.
And there you can see those clamp arms beginning to open around the second stage there on your screen. Now, propellant is loaded late in the countdown, and that's intentional. Colder propellants are denser, and denser propellants mean more performance out of the same tanks. The colder it is, the more mass that you can move. And before any of that propellant flows, the plumbing and engines get chilled down, and that prevents thermal shock and boil-off when the ultra-cold liquid starts moving. And you may hear that referred to as engine chill.
Loading wraps in 2 steps. The first stage finishes around T-minus 3 minutes, so we still have got around 30 seconds there, and then the second stage will finish about a minute later. You've probably noticed these white clouds venting from the rocket. It's actually condensation. As the liquid oxygen warms slightly inside the tanks, some of it kind of boils off, and then that gas is vented to manage the pressure. When the vented oxygen hits the warm air outside, it instantly condenses into clouds. It's the same principle as your breath on a cold morning, just a much bigger scale.
Load complete.
Good call out there.
Now at the T-minus 60-second mark, Falcon 9 will enter startup, and at that point, the rocket's onboard flight computers will have taken over. And from then on, the countdown will be fully autonomous.
Once we hit inside of T-minus 2 minutes, the 9 Merlin 1D engines will ignite. Once they're at full power, Falcon 9 will lift off of the pad and begin its climb to orbit. As of now, the payload remains healthy. Falcon 9 is tracking no issues. Weather is still green, and the range is ready to support our T0 of 5:04 p.m. Eastern Time. With that, we're proceeding into the last few minutes here of terminal count.
Coming up shortly, we should hear that.
Stage 2 LOX load complete.
And there's that call out for Stage 2 LOX loading completion. Falcon 9 is now fully loaded with 1 million pounds of kerosene fuel and liquid oxygen. Now, next major milestone coming up in about 40 seconds from now will be that call out for Falcon 9 being in startup.
Gas launch closeout.
We should be hearing that call out for Falcon 9 startup in just a few moments from now.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
And great call out there. Lastly, we'll hear the final go, no-go from our launch director.
Launch director, go for launch.
And great call out there. LD is go for launch. So let's sit back and watch as Falcon 9 takes our MTG S1 mission to space.
T-minus 30 seconds. T-minus 15. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition and liftoff. Go Falcon, go MTG S1.
Vehicle is pitching downrange.
Heavy motion power.
We've just passed 30 seconds and counting. Falcon 9 has successfully lifted off from Launch Complex 39A at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. In just a few
Falcon 9
seconds,
power and telemetry are nominal.
amazing call out there. Everything is nominal. Great to hear. In just a few seconds, we'll throttle the engines down.
Falcon 9 is supersonic.
Great call out again. We'll throttle the engines down in preparation for max Q, a period of maximum aerodynamic pressure.
Now we should be hearing that call out for max Q in just a few moments from now.
Max Q.
Amazing. So we just heard that call out for max Q. The rocket has just passed. It'll experience the greatest mechanical stress in flight at that point. The rocket typically needs to go 17,500 miles per hour horizontally in order to avoid being pulled back down to Earth and get into orbit. You can keep an eye on the Stage 1 telemetry on the bottom of your screen.
Now we're going to have several...
MVAC in-flight chill.
Good call out there. We're going to have several events coming up in quick succession, and we should hear all of those called out by Mission Control, starting with main engine cutoff, or MECO, then stage separation, SES1, and lastly fairing separation. MECO is where we shut down all 9 M1D engines on the first stage. Stage separation is when the first and second stages of Falcon separate from one another.
And second engine start, 1 or SES1, is when we will light the MVAC engine on the second stage for the first time. Less than a minute later, the fairing will then jettison from the second stage as it's no longer needed to protect the payload once we're in space. So keep an eye out for these events happening back to back. It's all coming up in about 10-15 seconds from now. Just waiting
And
on
MECO.
that. There's that MECO call out they were looking
Stage
for.
separation confirmed.
MVAC ignition.
And there you heard and maybe even saw those events that happened back to back, which again were MECO, followed by stage separation, and then SES1. And in just about 20 seconds from now, we'll have fairing separation.
Fairing separation confirmed.
Amazing view there of fairing separation. Now, as we mentioned earlier, we will be attempting to retrieve these fairing halves once they fall back to Earth, and they'll be taken to shore by our ocean recovery vessel, Doug.
We're approaching just about 4 minutes into today's mission. At about T plus 6 minutes, you should see on your screen first stage's entry burn. To start the entry burn, we're going to relight 3 M1D engines, starting with the center engine, known as E9, followed shortly after by E1 and E5, which is similar to pumping the brakes to slow down the vehicle as it passes back into Earth's atmosphere. We need to slow down to reduce re-entry forces, which then helps us recover and reuse the first stage. During that entry burn, Falcon 9 is decelerating by firing its Merlin engines, but we still are moving very fast. This causes the vehicle to fly through Merlin's exhaust gases.
Both vehicles are following a nominal trajectory.
Great call out there, still moving nominal. This causes the vehicle to fly through Merlin's exhaust gases, also known as the rocket's plume, which deposits a layer of soot on the vehicle's surface. That soot comes from the carbon-based fuel that Falcon 9 uses, and with each flight, that soot builds up a little more on the outside of the vehicle. Oftentimes, prior to launch, you can see that soot from prior flights on the first stage.
Now, just as a reminder, the second stage of our Falcon rocket is on the right-hand side of your screen, currently taking our payload to orbit, and on the left-hand side of your screen is our Falcon 9 booster, which is going to be making its way back down to Earth. This booster is flying for its 9th time today, having previously supported NASA Crew 9, RRT-1, Firefly Blue Ghost Mission 1, From 2, Sirius XM-10, and 3 Starlink missions. You can keep an eye on the telemetry of both stages at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen for the booster and the right-hand side for the second stage. Coming up in just about 20 seconds from now, we should be hearing the call out for the entry burn of the Falcon 9 first stage, which, as a reminder, is on the left-hand side of your screen.
Stage 1, entry burn startup.
Stage 1 FTS is saved.
And good call out there for entry burn startup of the Falcon 9 first stage.
Stage 1, entry burn shutdown.
And great call out there for entry burn shutdown of our Falcon 9 first stage.
Great to hear. One of the most iconic things about Falcon 9 is its reusability. It's key to lowering the cost of spaceflight, which enables more investments in critical scientific research. The Falcon 9 first stage that is supporting today's mission is performing this entry burn for the 9th time.
Now, the Merlins on the first stage are optimized for sea level, and these achieve 190,000 pounds of thrust each during ascent and descent. At liftoff, Falcon 9's first stage has thrust greater than 5 747 airplanes at full power. And the MVAC engine on the second stage, which has a much wider nozzle, is optimized to 220,500 pounds of thrust in vacuum.
In a little over 30 seconds, the second stage Merlin vacuum engine will shut down.
Stage 1, entry transonic.
There's that call out there. And after that, we will start our landing burn on the first stage.
Stage 2 is in terminal guidance.
Stage 2 FTS is saved.
Stage 1, landing burn.
And good call out there for the landing burn start on our Falcon 9 first stage.
Nominal orbit insertion.
Stage 1, landing leg deploy. Stage 1, landing confirmed.
And there's that call out of landing confirmation for our Falcon 9 first stage. As a reminder, this was the 9th launch and landing for this first stage, which previously launched NASA Crew 9, RRT-1, Firefly, Blue Ghost Mission 1, From-2, Sirius XM-10, and 3 Starlink missions. We also heard a call out for nominal orbital insertion.
With that, Stage 2 is embarking on its coast phase, after which the MVAC engine will relight for a second time at about T plus 26 minutes. This will be followed by another short coast and then payload deploy.
We're going to take a quick break now and leave you with some space jams, and we'll see you back here in about 15 minutes.
Welcome back to our live coverage of the MTG S1 mission. We've had a great mission so far with an on-time liftoff of 5:04 p.m. Eastern Time from Launch Complex 39A at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. After a successful stage separation, the first stage returned to Earth with a precision landing on our drone ship. Just read the instructions. And just before the break, we had confirmation of nominal orbital insertion.
And coming up next, the Merlin vacuum engine on the second stage will reignite for the second time, and you might hear it referred to as SES-2. So we're currently listening in for that call out about 20 seconds from now. Now this burn will last a little more than a minute before the second stage engine shuts down for the second time, and that'll be called out as SECO-2. And then we'll have another coast phase, which will last just a few minutes.
MVAC ignition.
And good call out there for MVAC ignition. So as I mentioned, this burn will last a little more than a minute before the second stage engine shuts down. Now our customer for tonight's mission is Eumetsat. The Meteosat third generation sounder, or MTG S1, will be the first ever European sounding satellite in geostationary orbit. MTG S1 is the second satellite of the MTG system, and the imaging satellite Meteosat 12 is already in orbit.
MTG S1 actually carries two missions, the infrared sounder and the Copernicus Sentinel-4 ultraviolet visible near-infrared light imaging spectrometer. The Copernicus Sentinel-4 mission is an ultraviolet, visible, and near-infrared sounder. It's expected to send hourly data over Europe on aerosols, which are fine particles in the atmosphere, as well as on the concentrations of nitrogen dioxide, or NO2.
MVAC shutdown.
MVAC shutdown, great call out there. As I was saying, nitrogen dioxide, or NO2.
Nominal orbit insertion.
Nominal orbit insertion, there's that call out there. We've got ozone, or O3, and sulfur dioxide, which is SO2. With two different types of satellites, both disseminating data in near real time, MTG is expected to revolutionize numerical weather prediction and nowcasting of high impact weather in Europe and in Africa. And with that second shutdown of the MVAC engine, the second stage is going to coast for about 6 minutes. We're going to take a short break for that coast, and we'll be back for the deployment of the MTG S1 satellite. See you guys in a few.
Welcome back to our continued coverage of the MTG S1 mission. Now, before the break, the Merlin vacuum engine on the second stage reignited and burned for a little more than a minute before successfully shutting down for the second time.
Now we're a little less than a minute away from expected payload deploy, and we should be able to see that as it happens. A little bit before the break, I was speaking about our customers, so want to reiterate some of the fantastic things that they're doing here for tonight's mission with Eumetsat. That is the third Meteosat, the Meteosat third generation sounder, or MTG S1. It'll be the first European sounding satellite in geostationary orbit. MTG S1 is the second satellite of the MTG system. The imaging satellite, Meteosat 12, is already in orbit. MTG S1 carries 2 missions, the infrared sounder and the Copernicus Sentinel-4 ultraviolet visible near-infrared light imaging spectrometer. In combination with data from Meteosat 12, MTG S1 will enable weather and climate scientists to get a 4D vision of the dynamics and composition of the atmosphere.
Now, in combination with data from Meteosat 12, MTG S1 will enable weather and climate scientists to get that 4D vision, and with 2 different types of satellites, both disseminating data in near real time, MTG is expected to revolutionize numerical weather prediction and nowcasting of high-impact weather in both Europe and Africa. Now we should be hearing that call out for payload deployment in just about 12 seconds from now.
MTG S1 payload deploy confirmed.
Super exciting call out to hear there. You can see the successful deployment of the MTG S1 geostationary weather satellite.
And with successful payload deployment, that'll wrap up tonight's live coverage of the MTG S1 mission. All of us here at SpaceX want to thank our customer, Eumetsat. We also want to thank the Eastern Range and Federal Aviation Administration for supporting today's mission. Now, if you're interested in more launch coverage, be sure to check spacex.com/launches for the most up-to-date information. And of course, remember to follow @SpaceX on X. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again soon.